Well, welcome to our latest of the Heuermann Lecture series for this academic year. It's a pleasure to welcome you here to Hardin Hall on East Campus at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. The Heuermann Lectures is a series that focuses on food security, natural resource security, rural security issues as we think about them globally around the world. We've been very pleased to be able to bring this lecture series to life the last several years in the Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources, largely through the generosity of the Heuermann family, Keith and Norma Heuermann, who are longtime agriculturalists from Phillips, Nebraska, about an hour and a half west of us here in Lincoln. Keith is with us today. He's only missed one of these lectures in 3 years, and it's a pleasure, Keith, for you to be here. Please thank Keith for their generosity. We are very pleased that these lectures are archived on the web, so if you're interested in looking at previous lectures or some that are yet to come in the future, we welcome you to go there to heuermannlectures.unl.edu to see those. They're all archived by video. We also broadcast these on the state cable channel, so it's being live broadcasted today. And it appears later on NET. So you might have seen a number of our lectures that air on the Nebraska Educational Television Network. Today, we turn our focus to our culture war over food and farming. And we're very pleased to welcome to the Heuermann Lectures stage Dr. Robert Paarlberg. I had the opportunity to hear Dr. Paarlberg give the Hatch Lecture at the American Public and Land-Grant University's meeting this past year. The Hatch Lecture refers to the Hatch Act that formed the experiment stations as part of the land-grant university system a number of years ago in the 1800s. And in that lecture, he talked about Africa, which is the topic of one of his books and development efforts in Africa. Dr. Paarlberg is the Betty Freihoff Johnson 44 professor in the Department of Political Science at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. He's the co-author of one book and author of 8, including Food Politics. Mine is dripped with sweat because I've been reading it on the treadmill for the last several weeks. I was telling Dr. Paarlberg, entitled Food Politics, What Everyone Needs to Know. And I think that will largely be a lot of the subject of his discussion this afternoon. He's also authored Starved for Science, How Biotechnology is Being Kept Out of Africa, which carries a foreword by 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter and the late Norman Borlaug, who we know as the father of the Green Revolution. Dr. Paarlberg has also written numerous articles for both academic and popular publications. He is a researcher in food and agricultural policy with a focus on farming technologies and poverty in the developing world. He's also an adjunct professor of public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School and an associate at the Harvard University Weatherhead Center for International Affairs. One of the things I found really interesting about Dr. Paarlberg, and I was checking my facts with him here before we started, in the foreword to his food politics book, if you've read it, you'll find that he talks about his family and his roots in agriculture. His father, who was a noted agricultural economist at Purdue University and served in USDA leadership during his career, an uncle, a brother to his father, who managed the agricultural operations for Purdue University, and a cousin who is also a faculty member in this area at Purdue. So he has a deep roots in feeling about agriculture from his own heritage and his background. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Paarlberg to discuss our culture war over food and farming. Bob.
Thanks very much for that kind introduction. You mentioned my book that had the foreword from 2 Nobel Peace Prize winners. I was particularly pleased when the original Amazon site for that book identified me as the winner of 2 Nobel Peace Prizes. I told my students, winning the first Nobel Peace Prize isn't that difficult. It's the second one that's the real challenge. But it's a pleasure to be here, and I'd also like to thank Keith and Norma Heuermann for their generosity in endowing this lecture series, and for my hosts here at the University of Nebraska for inviting me to come participate. Now, I admit from the start, I'm from Massachusetts, and I work in a part of the country that unfortunately doesn't have a great deal of firsthand exposure to modern food and farming activities, except maybe in the case of cranberries. What goes on in states like Nebraska is something that people in Massachusetts don't know a great deal about. I still remember back in 1988 when the governor of my state, Michael Dukakis, some of you may remember Michael Dukakis, was running for the presidency, and he made a trip to Iowa. And he told corn growers in Iowa that producing grains was a dead end, that they should convert more of their land to the production of crops like Belgian endive. It was the kind of comment that was appropriately ridiculed at the time as being a little out of place with his audience. But those who operate America's highly successful farming systems here in states like Nebraska can't really afford to laugh anymore at the sometimes poorly informed opinions that outsiders have about what they're doing, because conventional agriculture in the United States is under a strong attack. I liken it to a kind of culture war. It's under a strong attack by those who think that our conventional food and farming systems are going in the wrong direction. Now, I'm going to, today, I'm not going to offer my opinion as to who's right or wrong in this contest between conventional agriculture and alternative agriculture. I'm a political scientist by training. My goal today is simply to describe as best I can the current balance of power in this contest. Who, at the moment at least, seems to have the upper hand, who is winning. And it's not really one contest. It's if I can move the slide forward. There's my much less artistic opening slide that I'll skip over here. It's a 3-part contest. It's a battle with 3 sub-battles. It's in the cultural arena. It's a competition over ideas, over values, and over visions for food and farming. But then there's also a commercial arena, and here it's a competition for market share. It's a competition for making dollar sales of actual products. But then there's a third arena in the governmental arena. In the political arena, there's a competition to control the instruments of policy, the taxes, the regulations, the mandates that governments use to redistribute resources or to shape social outcomes. And these 3 contests are going on at the same time. And I'd be curious to know from this audience which of these 3 sub-contests you think is most important. If you wanted to win the big battle in the end, which of these sub-battles would you want to win first? Would it be the governmental space, the commercial space, or the ideational space? Let me ask for a show of hands. How many people, starting at the bottom, how many people would first want to win the battle over public policy? Okay. How many people would first want to win the battle in the commercial marketplace? How many people would want first to win the battle over ideas? Okay, I got pretty strong responses for the political marketplace and for the market for ideas, and slightly lower response for the commercial marketplace. And I think that's correct. The commercial market will, in the end, probably be a follower of outcomes in these other two arenas rather than a leader. And the critics of conventional agriculture in the United States have, in fact, concentrated so far on the first and the third of these arenas, particularly the first arena, the cultural space. Their strongest push so far has been to win the battle of ideas. And here there are really three separate contests over ideas, or there are three dimensions of cultural difference between defenders of conventional agriculture and critics of conventional agriculture, advocates for alternative agriculture. First, the issue of productivity and scale. Defenders of conventional farming believe that high productivity is the goal, and they are willing to let agriculture become highly capitalized, highly specialized, highly industrialized, and to operate at a large scale, if necessary, to deliver that high productivity. Critics of conventional farming, advocates for alternative agriculture, say no, productivity isn't the first goal. First of all, we produce enough food already. The problem is distribution, not production. And they say the only sustainable and socially just kind of production system is one that will have small farms, not large farms, and small farms with diversity on the farm, livestock as well as crops, rather than highly specialized, highly capitalized farming systems. Second, there's a competition over the role of science. Advocates for conventional farming are perfectly comfortable using modern science to deliver high productivity, everything from GIS to GPS to GMO. They want it all. If it brings down costs and boosts productivity, they'll bring it on. Critics of conventional farming are skeptical of this approach. They believe that you can get only so far with a reductionist technical fix, that you're much better off trusting traditional knowledge rather than exotic laboratory science. And you shouldn't be trying to engineer nature or dominate nature. It's much better to learn from nature, to imitate nature, to put in place agroecological systems that function more like natural ecosystems. A third important difference is over who should be in control of our food and farming system. Conventional agriculture in the United States today is comfortable with competition in a relatively open marketplace between large corporate entities and commercial farms that are now themselves quite large. They're willing to accept regulations on this system from democratically elected representatives in government, but they're quite comfortable with a market economy in which large corporate entities play a lead role. Critics of the contemporary system take a very different view. They're deeply skeptical about the role of large companies in our lives in general and in food and farming in particular. They're mistrustful of government in Washington, D.C. because they suspect that our democratically elected representatives have been excessively influenced by campaign contributions from large corporate entities. They don't trust regulators because they think, once again, our government's been captured by corporate interests. Advocates for alternative agriculture would like to see more control returned to local communities. And if those local communities don't have a voice for themselves, then non-governmental organizations and social advocates and activists promoting environmental sustainability and social justice will serve as the voice for those local communities. So there are serious divergences here in the cultural arena between what advocates for conventional agriculture like and what advocates for alternative agriculture like. And it's pretty easy to sort the different groups in our society into these two opposing camps. The most vocal defenders of conventional farming, of course, include commercial farmers themselves, agribusiness companies, the agriculture committees of the Congress, who pass a farm bill every 4 years or every 5 years, or now we're getting up to every 6 years or so. Most agricultural scientists are comfortable with conventional farming systems, and most economists, most agricultural economists are comfortable with this system as well. Alternative farming systems they get their most vocal support from environmental advocates, social justice advocates, activists who don't like corporate globalization, animal welfare activists, and also what I would call opinion-making elites. Now, by opinion-making elites, I mean most journalists who write for a national audience, artists, filmmakers, celebrities, Hollywood. I mean those who tend to create elite opinion, particularly among those who are not from the farming community itself. These elites develop strong opinions about food and farming, but they live in places like New York or the San Francisco Bay Area or Hollywood, and so they may not have a great deal of intimate first-hand contact with the way farming operates today. So as for who's winning in this first arena, this cultural arena, I would say flat out, the advocates for alternative agriculture have already won. Their viewpoint is now dominant. It's hard outside of an agricultural school at a state university in the Midwest to find anyone who's willing to stand up and have a good thing to say about our modern style of farming. I mean, I encounter students from all over the country. I teach in New England, but I encounter good students from all over the country, and most of them come to my classes with their mind already made up about our current food and farming system. They've all seen the documentary film Food, Inc., which was nominated for an Academy Award back in 2010. They've all read Michael Pollan's book, Omnivore's Dilemma. They've all read a half a dozen other books exposing the many weaknesses of our conventional food and farming systems. They believe that our current food and farming system is generating foods that are unsafe and unhealthy. Our current system is environmentally unsustainable, and it's producing social outcomes that are rife with injustice. In fact, many young people today have been persuaded that the task of completely reinventing our food system from the bottom up is it's a social cause of significance and worth comparable to the civil rights movement in the 1960s or the women's movement of the 1970s. It's an idealistic goal for them to correct what they find to be seriously wrong with the existing system. Now this viewpoint is so dominant in my part of the country that you can risk social ostracism if you dare to put a contrary view forward. At dinner parties, I try to steer the conversation away from anything having to do with food and farming, just for self-protection. And even in a university setting, these views are hegemonic. I teach at Harvard University, and several years ago, the president of the university organized a session titled Sustainable Food, and it was a panel of speakers. The panel included a celebrity restaurateur from the San Francisco Bay Area, a playwright from New York who had previously worked for the celebrity restaurateur, and a recent Harvard College graduate who was then the president of the slow food movement in the USA. And these three panelists reached the unanimous conclusion that the only sustainable food system would have to be organic and local and slow. What I found most amusing about this was that Harvard University was embracing these views in public in a desperate effort to catch up to Yale University, which had earlier gone even farther in adopting in its own university dining hall system an embrace of exactly these kinds of production systems. So in the elite cultural space, the activist critics of conventional farming, I would say, have already won. But what about the commercial arena? When we turn where it's market share that you're after, the behavior of consumers is what you're after. Here, let's look at four different dimensions. First, the diet choices being made by consumers. Are they moving in the direction that the critics of conventional food and farming would advocate? Second, how is food being marketed? Is our food system, in fact, becoming relocalized in response to critiques of the way things are done now? What about crop farming practices? Are crop farming practices moving toward the alternative systems that the activists favor? And finally, in livestock production, have livestock production systems moved in the direction that the activists would prefer? Starting with diet choices, here, this is U.S. meat consumption per person from 1909 up to 2012. So this covers, more than a century. The left-hand scale is the pounds of boneless weight equivalent. So this is just pounds. It doesn't distinguish between different kinds of meat. In the area of diet choices by Americans, I think the critics of business as usual have won at least some provisional victories recently, and I would celebrate most of those victories myself. Per capita meat consumption has fallen by 10% over the last decade. I don't think this is a problem. I think that we'd be better off if we did reduce our meat consumption. Americans are not becoming vegetarians. Only 3% of Americans are vegetarians. But we are reducing our total quantity of meat consumption. In the past 5 years, per capita calorie consumption in the United States has declined by about 118 calories. That's about 5%. That's a good outcome. Americans consume too many calories. Remember, more than 1/3 of our adult population is clinically obese, so this is a good trend. We just learned, actually, that in the past 10 years, the prevalence of obesity among preschool children in the United States has come down. It's come down from about 13.8% to about 8.4%, which is still much too high, but that's moving in the right direction. Frequency of home-cooked meals has increased. That's a healthy sign. And more adults are consulting the Nutrition Facts Panel on packaged foods. Health consciousness is on the rise. In fact, we just heard yesterday that Food and Drug Administration is redesigning the Nutrition Facts Panel to make it easier for health-conscious consumers to interpret the content of the packaged foods that they're buying. Now, we don't know just how lasting all of these trends are going to be. The meat consumption trend may reflect an interlude of unusually high feed prices and hence unusually high meat prices. It may reflect the aging of the baby boom generation. It may reflect the impact of the recession. So some of these trends may be temporary rather than durable, but I'm prepared to accept the fact that the activist critique of the way that we eat in America, the food choices that we make as consumers, that critique is having an impact. And some of it will probably be a durable impact. And I think that's an outcome that we should welcome and celebrate. As for how we market food and the extent to which our food system is becoming more local, here the activists can point to some numbers that seem to indicate a substantial increase in local marketing. If you look at numbers of farmers markets in the United States since 1994, up from 1,700 to 7,800 by 2012. Number of community-supported agriculture organizations in the U.S. up from only 2 back in 1986 to 2,500 by 2010. There has been a significant increase in institutions that make it possible for growers to make direct sales to consumers. If you look at these numbers alone, you could almost believe that what had earlier been a dominant trend toward the globalization of food markets is now being replaced by a new trend toward localization. But I don't think that's the case. The local share of total farm sales in the United States remains quite small. The latest data we have are from 2007. Direct sales at farmers markets and CSAs plus local sales through restaurants and grocery stores back then were still just 1.9% of total farm sales, just 1.9%. Our food system was highly localized 100 years ago, but it's been delocalized as time has gone on, and I don't think we're going to go back to a highly localized food system. Shipping costs are so much more affordable now than they used to be. We have new technologies, containerization technologies, flash freezing technologies, and most of all, we have more demanding consumer tastes. Consumers today want tropical products, not just local products from North America, and they want fresh fruits and vegetables year-round, not just in season. And a local food system isn't going to deliver what consumers want. Consumers also want local foods if it's convenient and if it's in season, and they're willing to support the expansion of a local food niche for reasons that have as much to do with social interaction as with food. And so farmers markets and CSAs are growing, but they're still just a tiny niche, and their growth is not nearly as fast overall as the growth of long-distance food marketing, increasingly globalized food marketing. Now, activists also would like to move us to organically grown foods, and here, once again, you do see some rapid growth in the marketplace for this particular form of alternative food production. From 2000 to 2010, organic sales increased from about $6 billion up to around $27 billion. Substantial growth in total sales. But you can see from the bottom line that the market share of organic, with all of that growth, it was still less than 5% in 2010. It's rapid growth, but it's rapid growth from a very low level, and so not anywhere near threatening the continued dominance of non-organic conventional farm production. Also, we should point out that while the organic sector has grown, most of the organic foods for sale on the market today don't any longer satisfy the criterion of being alternative, because they're being grown not on small diversified farms, but on large, highly specialized, highly capitalized farms, particularly in California, Earthbound Farm. In fact, 45% of all organic production in the United States comes from just two states, California and Washington. My wife and I spend the summer in the state of Maine. Maine has more organic farmers than any other state in the Union, but the total quantity of food produced by that large number of small organic farmers is just the smallest drop in the bucket of our national food market. Also, very little of the organic food that's being grown these days is being sold locally through farmers markets. Only 7% of organic food today is being sold through farmers markets. The largest share is being sold the way conventional food is sold, through large retail chains, stores like Walmart. So to the extent that organic has scaled up a little bit, it's been able to scale up as much as it has by being less alternative and by being more conventional, by going to specialized production systems and distant rather than local, and mass retail rather than direct sales. And in spite of impressive growth, the footnote of organic farming on the landscape remains small. If you look at the organic share of harvested cropland, this is the cropland certified for organic production. The most recent data we have is 2008. Less than 1% of total U.S. cropland was certified organic. But now this presents a major puzzle. You should be asking yourself at this point, farmers who do convert to organic systems can sell their products at a much higher price. They can get a premium of 20% or 50% or even 100% more if they can sell a product that has the USDA organic certification stamp on it. So why aren't more farmers converting from conventional systems to organic systems? Why does the organic footprint on the land remain so small? And here the answer is that organic systems, they command a higher price in the marketplace, but the production costs are higher still because of higher labor costs. And the labor requirements of organic systems, handling composted animal manure, managing weeds with mulching and with tillage rather than with the easier systems available to conventional farmers. The labor costs are extremely high. And also the land costs are much higher for organic systems because crop yields in organic systems are significantly lower than in conventional systems. These data are from the USDA. They show how much lower organic yields are. The 100% line there is the yield average for non-organic producers. You can see, with the curious exception of sweet potatoes, which I can't explain, for these vegetable crops, organic yields are 20% less, 40% less, in some cases almost 70% less than yields for conventional crops. So land is now cheap in America. The land requirements of organic systems are much higher than for conventional systems. This is for vegetable crops. If we look at row crops, you see a similar organic disadvantage. Organic corn farmers, look at the corn line here, have yields that are only about 2/3 as high as conventional corn growers on average. And this doesn't include the land requirements in organic systems linked to more frequent rotations with low-value crops. So put all these things together, and the premium that's out there for organic producers isn't enough to overcome the higher labor costs and the higher land costs, and also the greater uncertainty that comes with growing organic foods. Their systems are more risk-prone in many respects, from insects, for example, crop disease, than conventional systems. But in addition, organic systems are also failing to compete in the commercial marketplace because conventional farming in America has not been standing still. Critics of conventional farming have been predicting actually for decades now that these systems are unsustainable, that the productivity of the land is being exhausted, that it's only a matter of time before we overshoot and crash. All of this productivity is just an illusion. But the best data we have on trends in total factor productivity suggest just the opposite. If you look at conventional agriculture, annual rates of growth of total factor productivity is the value of what you get out compared to the value of what you had to put in. And notice from these USDA calculations that the growth in total factor productivity has actually accelerated in the most recent 2-decade period compared to the previous 2-decade period. So we're not hitting a wall or hitting a ceiling by any means. When total factor productivity is increasing, and when it's increasing at an accelerating rate, and when it's increasing at an accelerating rate from an already high level, this is a sign of a production system that isn't exhausting itself. It's a production system that's continuing to deliver gains that organic systems simply have not been able to keep up with in the commercial marketplace. Now, something else most critics of conventional farming in America fail to appreciate. Conventional farming systems in America are often described as high input, high output systems. Well, they are high output systems, but total input use in American agriculture has actually been in decline since 1980. This is once again from USDA. This is an index of agricultural output, inputs, and total factor productivity. The top line, the teal green line, is the total output line. You can see that it's increased significantly. But notice inputs were increasing a little bit until the late 1970s, and then they peaked, and now they've been, if anything, in decline. To describe American agriculture as high output, high input is to miss the significant reduction, absolute reduction in input use that's been going on. Total fertilizer use in American agriculture peaked in 1981, even though production has increased by 40% since then. Total pesticide use in American agriculture peaked in 1973. A lot of critics of conventional farming either aren't aware of this or they find it an inconvenient truth that they'd rather not share with their audience. These data tell the story for corn and soybean production in particular. These are data since 1980 on land use, soil erosion, irrigation, water applied energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions for corn and soybean in the United States, you can see that this is per bushel of production. You can see that for every bushel of corn production today compared to 1980, American farmers have managed to use 30% less land. Yields have gone up, so land use per bushel goes down. They've managed to lose 67% less soil. We've moved to no-till and to conservation tillage systems that are soil conserving. They've managed to cut irrigation water use by 53%. We've moved from highly wasteful systems, flood systems, to center pivot systems, to drip systems, and to precision applications of water. They've managed to reduce energy use per bushel of production by 43%. We're burning much less diesel fuel now, in part because we've gone to no-till, so we're not pulling the machinery across the field. We've cut insecticide sprays because we've gone to BT crops. Energy use per bushel of production is way down, and as a result, greenhouse gas emissions are down by 36% in corn since 1980 per bushel of production. I mean, this is an enviable record of sustainability, driven in some small part by environmental regulations, by the Environmental Protection Agency, but it's been driven primarily by technological change in a highly competitive market arena. This is, I think, a testament to what effective market competition and adequate investments in research and development in new cropping systems can produce. If only the rest of our economy had done this well, we would have something to be proud of. Now, in one part of our crop sector, however, in the commercial marketplace, the activists have scored at least a partial victory, and that's in the area of genetically modified crops, GMOs. Here in the United States, corn, soybean, and cotton in GMO form dominate the marketplace, but that's a market for animal feed and for industrial purposes, the textile industry for cotton and ethanol for much of our corn crop. So for feed use and for industrial use, GMO crops are dominant. But there the opponents of conventional farming have lost. But for food crops, for direct food consumption, here the opponents have won. We're not planting any GMO wheat. We're not planting any GMO rice. We're not planting any GMO potatoes. We used to, but they were withdrawn. In fruits and vegetables, we used to be planting GMO tomatoes, but they've been withdrawn. Almost no GMO fruits and vegetables, just a little bit of, well, some papaya in Hawaii, and some summer squash, and a little bit of sweet corn. But almost all of our crops for direct human food consumption are non-GMO. People like to imagine the Monsanto company as a juggernaut that's forcing foods down our throat. But that company has invested hundreds of millions of dollars to develop GMO food crops, and they work. Agronomically, they work extremely well, and yet they have not been accepted in the commercial marketplace. Opponents of GMOs, when it comes to food crops have won a sweeping victory. And the activist critics of GMOs have also gained the upper hand outside of the United States when it comes to permission to plant. Outside of the United States, GMO industrial crops and animal feed crops are consumed, but not too many countries are willing to plant them. Europe isn't. And in Asia and Africa, very few farmers today are legally permitted to grow any GMO crops. European-style regulatory systems have been imposed on this technology in nearly all of Asia and Africa. So the planting of these crops, even for industrial use, like BT cotton, has been, it's not legal. In all of sub-Saharan Africa today, the 47 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, it's not legal to plant any GMO crops at all in 44 of those 47 countries. Only in Sudan and Burkina Faso and in the Republic of South Africa is it legal to plant any GMO crops at all. And in Sudan and Burkina, it's just cotton, an industrial crop. So this technology has been stopped dead in its tracks for food crops. And around the world, even for animal feed and for industrial use, the technology has been blocked in most of the developing world. That's a victory for the critics of conventional farming. That's significant. And this global rejection of GMO food crops in particular, like wheat, rice, and potato, is something that the critics would now like to lock in by promoting mandatory labels on GMO food crops here in the United States, where we haven't until now required such labels. They would like mandatory labels for foods that contain any GMO ingredients at all, just a little bit of cornstarch or just a little bit of soybean oil or just a little bit of beet sugar would earn a stigmatizing GMO label. And this battle isn't over. Efforts in California and the state of Washington to get mandatory labeling through ballot issues failed narrowly in 2012 and in 2013. In New England, in my part of the country, last year in 2013, two states, Connecticut and Maine, legislatures did pass mandatory labeling laws. But those laws won't come into effect until a critical number of other New England states pass similar measures. So this battle isn't over yet, but the advocates for mandatory labeling, they've already won in the cultural space. They're now trying to win in the political space in order to lock in, for food crops in particular, what's already been a victory for them in the commercial space. So to summarize, in the crop sector, in the marketplace for ideas, here the critics are dominant. They've won a dramatic victory. And in the commercial marketplace, the critics have been able to block GMO food crops, wheat, rice, potato, and nearly all fruits and vegetables. But otherwise, the critics haven't won. Conventional crop production and marketing systems continue to win, largely because of their unchallenged productivity and their unsurpassed ability to deliver to consumers the full variety of products that they want throughout the calendar year at an affordable price. But now when we move to animal agriculture, in the animal agriculture sector, we see a slightly different pattern of outcomes. Here, the issue isn't really meat consumption itself. As I say, only 3% of Americans are vegetarian, and that percentage isn't growing very fast. Here, the issue instead is the manner in which we raise animals and produce meat, milk, and eggs, that is in modern concentrated animal feeding operations, CAFOs. The CAFO system, rapid technical change and intense market competition has been just as effective as our systems in the crop sector in bringing down production costs and in delivering products of consistent quality and products that are safe to eat, not necessarily healthy to eat, but safe to eat to America's consumers. But these systems have nonetheless come under intense attack in at least 4 different areas. First is food safety. And here the industry really hasn't had much to worry about because industry performance here has been exceptional. The industry has such a self-interest in putting meat products, animal products on the market that are safe for consumers. They know one bad actor is going to lead to market withdrawals and to market stigmatization and to lost sales for everybody. So the industry actually welcomed the tougher food safety standards that were enacted by Congress in 2010. Industry has done a good job. They welcome tighter regulations. Their performance has been very good in the safety dimension. Meanwhile, the activist critics are a little bit divided here because those who promote very small scale, highly localized, artisanal cheese-making or meat production systems, they're a little bit worried about the paperwork requirements, the inspection requirements that are being imposed on the industry, and they have been forced to ask for exemptions from those requirements, and they got them in the Congress. So they find it hard to go on the attack against industry when they've had to ask for exemptions from the standards that the industry has welcomed. On environmental issues, here the industry hasn't performed as well. The livestock industry is still responsible for significant air pollution and water pollution. And in some cases, when things go wrong at CAFOs, the environmental damage can be and has been spectacular. But here, the industry is relatively protected in the political marketplace in Washington, D.C. from stronger environmental regulations. It has friends in Congress, and so far the Environmental Protection Agency has not gone much beyond regulations for the discharge of pollutants that's planned or intentional. Regulations don't really do a very good job of covering accidental spills from lagoons. Of course, it's the accidental spills that usually do most of the damage. So although the industry isn't doing as good a job with environmental protection as it is with food safety, it remains pretty well protected from critics in that sector. But when it comes to antibiotic use, here the activists are scoring some gains. 80% of all antibiotic use in the United States is on livestock. And of course, there's a legitimate concern that excessive antibiotic use in livestock will create resistant strains of bacteria that may eventually threaten human health, and we won't have a tool that we can use against them. Now, giving antibiotics to healthy animals solely for the purpose of weight gain has been banned in Europe since 1998, but it's still a significant part of the livestock industry in the United States. And yet, the tide has been turning, in part because of a federal court ruling in 2012. The FDA has now begun a 3-year phase-out of antibiotic use for growth promotion in the livestock industry, and it's phasing in mandatory veterinary oversight of antibiotic use. So here the industry is being forced to make some changes. I don't think these changes are going to cripple the industry, but they're changes that the industry resisted that are now being imposed upon them by activists that have won in the court system and in the court of public opinion. But the biggest gains by activists so far have been on animal welfare issues. And here on battery cages for egg-laying hens, a ballot issue to require larger cages passed in California in 2008, and that has really set a trend in motion. By 2011, the Humane Society of the United States, which is which is the point organization when it comes to animal welfare. I'm not talking about PETA, which gets a lot of headlines. I'm talking about an effective political organization that knows how to use ballot issues and legislation and negotiation to force changes onto the industry. The HSUS in 2011 was able to force a deal with the United Egg Producers to push for a federal law in the area of battery cages. And food companies now, like Unilever, have made pledges to source eggs only from cage-free producers. Unilever says it's going to become cage-free. And on sow gestation crates, here are the stories a little bit similar. Here, the first state-level ban, once again driven by a ballot issue, was in Florida in 2002. And by 2007, Smithfield was committing itself to source only from crate-free growers by 2017. And in 2012, McDonald's moved to eliminate pork from crates from its servings. And Wendy's, Safeway, Cracker Barrel, Kroger, Kraft, and others followed suit. Now, the industry tried to push back. In the House of Representatives, there was something called the King Amendment that was designed to block any state-level initiative that might restrict commerce across state lines on grounds of different animal welfare standards. But the King Amendment was dropped from the final version of the Farm Bill that passed in the conference committee. So here, I would say animal welfare advocates are scoring real victories. So to summarize, in conclusion, where do we stand on balance? I would say, is alternative agriculture winning? I would say that in the cultural marketplace, yes, they've already won. I would say that in the commercial marketplace for crops, no, they haven't won by any means, except for GMO food crops. In the commercial market for animal products, they haven't won yet, but they're making headway, particularly if the issue is either human health, antibiotics, or animal welfare. In the political marketplace, they certainly haven't won yet, but who knows what the future might bring. Now, so we have a kind of a split outcome, and what this challenges me to think about as a social scientist is, for how long can a society such as ours see one set of outcomes in the cultural marketplace and a significantly different set of outcomes in the commercial marketplace? And will the political marketplace be forced to move the commercial marketplace closer to the cultural marketplace, or vice versa? Can our house be divided, half alternative, half conventional? Alternative in the cultural marketplace, conventional in the commercial marketplace. And my guess is that it can for a significant period of time. I would guess that conventional agriculture is going to be obliged to make concessions on things like antibiotic use, on animal welfare, and on not having access to GMO for food crops for direct human consumption. But those concessions aren't going to push conventional agriculture away from its preferred model of being highly capitalized, highly productive, incorporating a lot of science, and being highly specialized. We're not going back to barnyard-style animal systems, and we're not going back to organically grown crops without any nitrogen fertilizer. That would be going back to the past rather than going toward the future. And in American politics, it's always been about the future. So let me stop there and welcome any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Paarlberg. We do have a tradition in the Heuermann Lectures where we like to encourage questions from the floor and the audience, and we do have a pretty full audience here today. So if there are questions that you would like to address to our lecturer, Jill Brown is down here with the microphone on the floor. It's important for you to use the microphone for the webcast and the archiving, and Cheryl is upstairs in the balconies. So is there a question? Over here, I believe.
Thank you for your remarks today. My question is in regard to the recent sale of Smithfield to Chinese corporation. And you had mentioned that Smithfield had contracted by 2017 to have cage-free, gestation crate-free pigs and swine. Will that purchase abrogate that contract?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. The Smithfield Pledge, so far as I know, wasn't a legally signed document. It was a corporate policy, so it probably never had any legal status. And so it didn't have any legal status to lose. The Chinese connection's interesting here. The Chinese consumer is, of course, not interested that much in animal welfare, but they're interested in food safety. And China's interest in Smithfield was mostly to learn more about how to produce meat without microbial contamination, not how to produce meat that will, in a way that's respectful to the welfare of the animals. The concentrated animal feeding operation system is spreading through Asia rapidly. It's spreading through Asia and Southeast Asia rapidly. 80% of all the new livestock facilities around the world are CAFO systems. So the CAFO system is going global, and it's going to go to China as well eventually. China doesn't want to challenge the CAFO system. I don't know if China's acquisition of Smithfield is going to do anything. I think if I were a smart Chinese entrepreneur, I wouldn't force Smithfield United States to abrogate its pledge to the American consumer. I would see that as a good way to maintain my market share in the United States while doing whatever I wanted to do in China.
I think there's questions up top, Cheryl.
You mentioned just in passing the health effects of our agricultural system, but I wonder if you have anything, your research politically shows anything for us as to the obesity epidemic around the globe.
Okay. Actually, I find it useful to draw a distinction between the health effects of our agricultural system, how we grow crops and how we raise livestock, versus the health effects of what food companies do to those products after they leave the farm. And I'm a pretty harsh critic of food companies. They add too much sugar, they add too much salt, they add too much fat, they process these foods to make them hyper palatable so you don't even have to chew before you swallow. They engineer these foods so that when they enter our mouth, they immediately hit a virtually addictive bliss point, and we consume too much. I think there's nothing to be proud of about most of the packaged and processed food products available on retail store shelves in the United States today. In fact, what sometimes frustrates me is to see agricultural producers whose products leave the farm as perfectly healthy. The salt and the sugar and the fat hasn't been added yet and haven't been processed. To see them standing shoulder to shoulder with food companies as though they're all a part of the same system And they're defending that system as providing the most abundant, the safest, the most convenient food supply in the world. I think agricultural producers in the United States need to be aware that the food companies are using their golden reputation as the custodians of our wonderful agrarian heritage as a kind of a cover for the things that the food companies are doing to the products after they leave the farm. I would like to see, in this culture war, I would like to see the agriculturalists creating a little more political space between themselves and the food companies, so that the food companies will be on the spot for the foods, not just the foods that they manufacture, but the foods that they advertise on television to children on Saturday morning. And of course, that's being done not just in the United States now, but as you allude, around the world. In Southeast Asia, every household now has a TV set. And big companies like Frito-Lay have gone in with massive advertising campaigns to bring in customers for their salted snack foods. That's not something that I'm particularly proud of, but I don't see that as a part of America's agricultural system. I see that as a part of our food company system that ought to be under tighter regulation for its advertising behavior in the United States, and I hope will be under tighter regulation around the world.
Additional questions? I think, Jill, there's a couple on the floor we'll take.
Very nice presentation. My question is water taken in your conceptual framework as an infinite resource? And if it's not taken as an infinite resource, how water availability in quantity and quality may alter your conceptual framework, and what is the role as well of biofuels in what you just showed, or how would alter biofuels the scenario that you showed?
Okay. Yeah, I'm not an expert on that. I know, or at least I've been told, that corn ethanol production in the United States is a heavy user of water. And so I would guess that in water-scarce regions where there's competition for use either from other industries or in residential use or ecosystem services, that's going to become an issue eventually. But I'm not an expert on that, I'm afraid. Most of the controversy around biofuels has been with the land use consequences rather than the water use consequences, and the hope that when we get to a second generation of biofuels feedstocks, all of that competition will go away it's a beautiful hope, but I don't think any of those feedstocks are commercially ready at the moment. Someone once described the biofuels mandate in the United States, which requires a certain share of our fuel consumption come from second generation at a certain time. I believe the EPA had to relax that requirement because what we were supposed to be using wasn't available. And someone joked about it. It was called the unicorn mandate. Everyone has to own a unicorn. Even though they don't exist, we have to own one. So I don't know where those second generation feedstocks are in terms of commercial availability right now, but I think we're going to continue to have serious issues with competition for use of good agricultural land and valuable water resources until we get to that second generation.
I think we have one more question up on the bottom, and Cheryl has one up top.
One of the concerns we have in agriculture is that even when we're here listening to a neutral presentation and a good analysis of both sides of this issue, I heard some figures that you said that even come out from the activist point of view, like 80% of the antibiotics used in America are animals, which is inflated, and it's tend to mislead the audiences and readers. And 35% of the antibiotics used in animals aren't used in humans, but that 80% figure, and that's just an example, is a largely inflated figure. So that's kind of the concern we have in agriculture is, you know, trying to fight the activists in these areas and defend what we do. It gets pretty tough even when things are presented in a neutral way. So just more of a comment than a question. So.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I mean, I've seen the 80% number in some credible sources, and I've never read a careful challenge of it, but I should make a point of doing that. You're correct. The livestock industry points out that many of the antibiotics it uses are not being used in human health, and vice versa. And so there's not a great deal of overlap between medical uses and livestock weight gain uses.
Cheryl has one up top, and I saw one other hand will be our last question.
Yeah, in your opinion, with the growing world population and increasing food demand, what are your opinions, or how are we going to meet these food demands to feed everybody?
Well, I look at where people are chronically undernourished today, and it's primarily in rural Africa and in the rural areas of South Asia. And the only way to improve that situation is to put more income in the hands of those who are undernourished. And the best way to do that, since they're mostly farmers, is to increase the productivity of their labor in farming. If you go to, I don't know how many people have been to Africa and left the hotel and gotten into a vehicle and gone up country and gotten off the tarmac road and walked into a farming community and looked around, it will be obvious immediately how many things are missing. These farmers, they're mostly women, they're mostly illiterate, they can't read or write in any language, there aren't any clinics nearby, so their children are sick. There's no veterinary medicine, so their animals are weak and sick. There's no fertilizer. There's no improved seeds. There's no irrigation. Only 4% of cropland in Africa is irrigated. There's no electrical power. There's no transport. The road system is weak. 70% of all people in rural Africa live more than 2 kilometers from the nearest paved road. So virtually all household transport takes the form of carrying things on foot. These people are missing all of the things that farmers in the rest of the world have used to increase their productivity and to escape poverty. And growing more food in Europe or North America isn't going to solve the problem in these communities. The only way to solve the problem in those communities is adequate investments in rural infrastructure so that inputs can be delivered and so that goods can be marketed, adequate investments in clinics and in schools, adequate investments in all of the things that these farmers need to become more productive. It's not a problem that can be solved by growing a surplus somewhere else. It's a problem that has to be solved locally. That's one issue I take with those in the activist community who criticize the productivity paradigm of American agriculture. They say, well, we don't need more food. We have enough food to feed everyone in the world right now. And yet they don't have any plan for getting the food that we grow here into the hands of these people who are off the grid in a place that's not even connected to the international market.
There's quite a discussion about sustainable intensification that goes right to that as well. But there's one last question. I saw a hand up on the top.
It's a sort of question comment about your use of the word elite. As I understood it, on the one side you had agribusiness, so we'd say Archer Daniels Midland making decisions about the next 5-10 years of investment of capital, and on the other side, a journalist. It doesn't strike me, the journalist, I also studied political science, the journalist is the member of the elite in that situation.
Well,
so,
yeah, good question. I should have said, I hope I said cultural elites. I don't think that if you look at what's written in the New York Review of Books or the Atlantic Monthly, it'd be a long time before you'll find an article by an agribusiness leader. You'll find a lot of articles criticizing agribusiness leaders. Maybe the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and that's a cultural elite. That's a subcultural elite. I'll put it that way.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Paarlberg for a great discussion. As you can see on the screen, we have the tradition in the Heuermann Lectures of presenting our lecturers with a medal that commemorates their time here at the University of Nebraska and tells the story a bit about the theme of our lectures. So Dr. Paarlberg, please accept on our behalf our thanks for joining us here and as a memento for you to remember your visit to Nebraska. Thank you very much.